Okay, so I'm going to begin. So welcome everyone to EMLYON's Sport in the 21st Century webinar series. We've had a little bit of a summer break, but we're back now with our first guest, Matt Rogan. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Simon Chadwick. I'm Professor of Eurasian Sport at EMLYON Business School. We're running these webinars really to help people gain insights into what are some of the most important issues right now in sport, not in any particular country, but I think certainly across Eurasia and even globally. And so what we've been doing is to meet with and to talk to people about, for example, women's football, about sponsorship. And today, I think we're going to have a really wide-ranging and hopefully broad discussion around some of the things that Matt has been involved in. Just ahead of beginning this one, looking ahead to the next one, we have Julia Palace from Formula E. She's the Director of Sustainability at Formula E. She'll be joining us in November. But otherwise, today we've got Matt. Just to say, Matt and I have not scripted this. So we both agreed that the best way to do this is spontaneously. And so, you know, we've not rehearsed a play, we've not rehearsed answers. We are being truly spontaneous, and we're going to improvise. And I think one of the reasons we decided to do that is because Matt in particular wants to receive questions from the audience, as do I. And so what I'm going to be trying to do is to monitor the chat forum in the audience as we go through. So please do ask Matt questions. From my side, I've firstly got to say thanks, Matt, for being here. It's not the first time that you've spoken as part of events that I've been involved in, and I guess that's because, you know, you've done something really amazing. You know, I do watch the things that you're doing, but also the answers that you give. And I think that there really is a lot of substance and a lot of relevance and in what Matt says. And so, you know, as we get into the webinar, I commend Matt to you. So I'm trying to think, Matt, the first time we met, and it was probably, you know, about 7 or 8 years ago. You were working for Lane 4 at that time. And from that point onwards, I've obviously followed the things that you've been doing and your commentary on the sport industry. So I'm not going to give you a big introduction beyond that, other than to say Matt's here for a reason. I think he's a great speaker, great insights. What we do have, Matt, is we do have lots of students here. We have lots of young people who are building a career in not just in the sport industry, but more broadly. So if I could begin by just asking a very simple question, is how did you get to where you are now? You know, where have you been and what are you doing?
Where have you been? Well, firstly, thank you for having me. Sorry to burst your bubble. I think it was actually 10 years ago when we first met. So it would have been about September 2010. And September 2010, I remember that because firstly, it was a fairly amazing trip we both had to France. And it
for work reasons, just to add that, for work reasons.
Yeah, well added. It was mostly work, from what I remember, and there was it was a point in that couple of days where I resolved the time was right to make the jump out of Lane 4 where I was working. Prior to that, I had I'd started off out of university as a French and German degree at Cambridge, left Cambridge, and started in strategy consultancy. From strategy consultancy, working for Bain McKinsey. 2 partners from each left and span a business out that I was part of. It was a great foundational building blocks for 3 years. Was then at the NBA, US Basketball League. After that, the MTV, running the European sponsorship team at MTV. Was considering going out on my own at the point, he said, turning his mobile off. That should still already be off, sorry. Was considering going out on my own at that point. I met a lovely guy called Adrian Morehouse, who's an Olympic winning swimmer. Adrian persuaded me that it would make sense to join his organization, Lane 4, a leadership development organization, development business. Thousands of people told me I was mad to leave the sexy world of sports and entertainment and go and run an HR consultancy business, essentially. but it taught me an awful lot. And after 7 years there, running the show with Adrian, he won Sunday Times Business Leader of the Year twice. We've been best companies to work for I think 4 times in a row. Came second once, and at some point you wonder whether you could do that job yourself. And so, not meeting you, Simon, and that 2 days in France, but it was around that time that I'd resolved to try and cash in what I'd learned at Lane 4 and set up a business, and set up with my wife and Gareth Bush. We 3 of us set up 2 Circles. Wind the clock on for we say a bit more about the business in due course, I'm sure, but wind the clock in another 10 years, and now's the point where I'm doing other things as well now. So it was quite a formative moment meeting you, but that's my career trajectory and how I come to be here today.
Okay, I'll invoice you for the 10% that you owe me, as obviously, you know, the influence that I've had on your career. We'll talk about that later. I mean, without wanting to spend too much time looking backwards, because what I really want to do is to focus on now and looking forwards. But as I say, there are going to be people listening currently who are going to think, "Wow, MTV, the NBA, what a great CV." During those early years, you know, what were you learning? What were you doing? What were you learning? And how has that shaped your career since then?
So I guess I would probably say that I learned more in my time in strategy consultancy, actually, than I learned at either the MBA or MTV. So coming out of a languages degree, I'd learned to communicate, to listen as well as to talk. I'd managed to coalesce groups of 25 German students for A-level English or the equivalent, as well as 25 10-year-olds, and they take very different skill sets. My criticism myself was, that's fine, I can communicate, I can listen, I can lead football teams, I can run tennis teams at university, I can do all that kind of good extracurricular stuff, but I didn't have the fundamental mechanics of business. So you could have shown me a P&L or a balance sheet or anything underlying those financial statements, and I wouldn't have known where to start. And that's what strategy consultancy gave me. And even in 3 years, it's almost like, I guess it was a bit of an applied MBA, really. It was only, even those 3 years, it gave me the tools and the techniques and the hard skills to then be able to take those into the MBA in European office, which at that time was relatively small, relatively modest, and needed people who understood what a balance sheet looked like of a potential sponsor, or could talk about the sort of trajectory of merchandising and licensing. Mm-hmm. From an MTV perspective as well, it was just at the point where sponsors were starting to get more challenging of putting their logos around the advertising hoardings for the Europe Music Awards, or trying to quantify in hard sales terms the impact of a bespoke deal with MTV in terms of the impact on sales in specific geographies around Europe. And so really it was my strat consultancy skill set that I then looked to apply into the MBA and MTV, and the MBA and MTV gave me a hard dose of understanding of how sports and entertainment was working at the time. MBA extremely well run. At the time, the joke was MBA stood for nothing but attorneys, and the law, the hard logic of business law was run through that organization under David Stern in a really good way. And I was lucky to work for a guy called Andrew Messick, who now runs Ironman, who also ex-McKinsey. And at the time, it was really that time in the sports industry was just beginning to professionalize, just beginning to understand that there might be some other things to value in a potential hire than just years at the coalface in sports. There might be things from outside sport to bring in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, it's interesting because I know obviously you've talked about moving on to 2 Circles, and for me, 2 Circles has been prominent, and literally, and this is not me making this up, literally about half an hour ago, I was scrolling through my Twitter timeline. There was a sport business story, 2 Circles, and all right, okay, 2 Circles is there again. So I mean, can you tell us what? And I know your role with 2 Circles is different now to what it used to be. But could you tell us, what is Two Circles? What led you to it? What is it? What was it doing? What does it do?
Probably the best way to do that is describe, given we've started with the past, describe a little bit about what the environment was like in 2010. So the environment in 2010 was just that tipping point to understanding that digital had more than a marketing purpose for rights holders, for teams and leagues. And whilst the marketing kind of fan engagement, send some emails, have a website type stuff was laudable, actually that you could understand more through a direct dialogue and direct engagement with your fan base. And so looking at the industry at that time, you had big kind of behemoth Octagon, IMG type agencies who were doing what they'd always done and doing it fairly well. You had some small little people selling websites, and good agencies selling websites, but who weren't really moving anywhere else other than building websites for teams and leagues. And you had a few kind of email marketing suppliers who were doing that. My background in strategy consultancy, I was sort of thinking, look, sports and entertainment, from my experience at MTV and the NBA, is changing beyond all measure. And actually the need for hard empirical decision making is greater than ever. I had met at the time, tried to hire a couple of times, Gareth Bush, who was installed at the time as head of commercial strategy for Manchester City. And they were really the first organisation at the time who'd started to pull down disparate data sources from websites, from emails, from ticketing, and sort of look at those in the round, can integrate them together and say, okay, well, what does this tell us about our fan base? Not just what does this tell us about how our emails can be more powerful and how we can sell more tickets, but also what does this tell us about where we might put clubs around the world in due course? Or what does this tell us about what the makeup of the stadium should look like for the next 10 years? Or what does this tell us about what an international membership with some content and things would look like? And so Gareth's experience very much kind of data out. Mine was very much market in. And so we put those two together and said, well, what if we built an agency that was sort of 20-30% strategy consultancy? So using information and principally first party, third party data to solve problems that sit on a chief exec's desk. 30-40% data integrator, technology business that could pull that information, hold it for our clients and make sense of it. So kind of technology business. And so 20-30% digital marketing agency. So having solved those problems for our clients, that we might be the ones that could execute campaigns to renew, initially mostly kind of bums on seats, so to renew tickets or to sell more digital sponsorship, whatever it might be. And that was the genesis of Two Circles, really. So it was we called ourselves, and still the business still does call itself a data-driven sports agency. So effectively using data to drive commercial decisions on behalf of clubs and teams and leagues is the genesis of this business. And it's kind of funny that we sit here today, and the announcement today was that Two Circles is launching in France. So it's kind of come full circle in these 10 years. Premise of the business over those 10 years hasn't really changed too much. And for each client, whether it's OTT, which of course is a newer bit of the jigsaw puzzle, or ticketing, or membership, or new stadia development, or launching or not launching a new event, putting data and evidence at the heart of that, that's more than research, that's first party customer behavior and analytics, fortuitously has been a central part of the story of the evolution of the sports business in the last 10 years.
So obviously, you have created and you built a successful business which continues, and as I say, I know your role has changed somewhat within Two Circles, but if you had to distill down for the scholars of business and leadership and management who are here today listening, how would you account for Two Circles' success? What were the key ingredients of making that work?
I would say there were probably three things. and I leave it to others to take a view on which of those were more or less important at any one time. There was, starting deeply internally, there was from minute one real clarity and focus around what we were looking to achieve as an organisation. First day, the three of us, so Gareth, myself and Claire, my wife, who became our FD on day one, whose background was venture capital and private equity, she became our first finance director. We were very clear. We set a 3-year business plan, or at least the fledgling start of that on day one, which was about what we aspired to do as an organisation, change the game for sports marketing. The way in which we decided to do that we were very clear that wasn't just to get our heads down and deliver work for clients. We built our business on a balanced scorecard from day one, with a real focus, not just around what we wanted in terms of financials the first 2-3 years, but also we split it up into very clear team, process, innovation, and clients as our 4 areas that we focused on, gave those equal weighting. So number one was a real clear focus on business plan and business strategy. Number 2 was, in the early days of the business, being extremely numbers led. So we decided that we wanted the same process and financial foundations as a business that had matured 18 months beyond our lifespan. Mm-hmm. So, we had timesheets and we were looking at the profitability of projects and things before we had any clients almost. But that was fundamental to having far deeper foundations, and that enabled us to go faster when we wanted to go faster, but also be a little bit cautious when that was times were a little bit challenging. We did set up in the back of the recession. Mm-hmm. And the third thing, no doubt, was the fact we hit the market at the right time, but actually we hit the market slightly early. And so a lot of what I found myself doing from a marketing perspective in the early days was trying to create a market. So spoke at a lot of events around trying to put a hypothesis for why big data and the transition of data in sport wasn't just doing more research, or that organizations weren't going to change no matter how much technology they bought from big tech providers, unless they actually changed the mindset to be more evidence-led internally. And so if I put the 3 things together, I'd say, fundamental business strategy from day one that was worked on a balanced scorecard, real deep financial foundations, and then creating a market which we could ultimately take advantage of. Mm-hmm. And probably the market's never been more receptive, sadly, than in the last 9 months. Two Circles is flying along, sadly, in some ways, because never has a sports league team athlete become more conscious of the need for a direct engagement with customers than now.
Which leads us neatly on, and before I kind of move on to that, can I just say at this point, for the people who are with us today, if you do have questions about how to make it in the industry, how to lead, how to manage, how to set up and run a business, then please do send those questions, and I'll try to make sure that we get through as many as we can. But just to move it on, and I don't know how to ask this question, Matt. I don't know whether to ask this question in terms of today, this very day, Thursday, or whether to ask this question on the 30th of January 2020. I think I'm going to ask it in terms of 30th of January 2020, and then we'll move slightly further forward in due course. From your perspective of somebody who's active in the industry, working with really high profile clients, try to keep in touch with the latest developments, market making, which I really liked your answer there, because I'm a firm believer too in the kind of seductive appeal or power of market making. But back on the 30th of January, being who you are and doing what you were doing, what were you seeing in sport, and what were you seeing around the big developments, the big issues at that point?
So if you will clock back to that time period, so my role at the time was as exec chair at Two Circles. Our deal with Bruin Sports Capital. So to cut a long story short, Two Circles did the first transaction with WPP, and then Bruin Sports Capital, which is sitting on a fund, was from CVC and Jordan Company, bought Two Circles out of that environment. So the deal's been announced, and despite that, we're still getting approaches from other sources of external investment looking at if they could support on the growth journey too. The market was, for a business of Two Circles type, was very lively, very vibrant. There's a little bit of noise in the market, perhaps, around the fact that TV rights might have topped out. And so some rights holders, more further thinking ones, starting to think, okay, well, how do we manage our the way in which we go about broadcasts to cover our bases if that's 3, 4, 5 years down the road? There was a lot of conversation around the pace with which, do the US sports come to Europe quicker than the European sports go to the US? It's perhaps felt slightly frothy as a market overall. There was still a lot of throwing around of acronyms at conferences, VR, AI, machine learning this, private equity's done this, venture capital's done that. Every rights holder in the world seemed to have their own little innovation hub. To what end, and wasn't really sure. So the market felt a little bit frothy, but generally confident and looking forward to a really strong 2020, which of course would have had Euros, football, Olympics, name your property.
Mm-hmm. And in amongst that, just to digress a little, as you know, Matt, I spend a lot of my time thinking about and writing about Asia. Yep. You've talked a lot about US venture capital in there and what's coming out of North America. What were you thinking at that point about Asia? Were you active there? Were you looking at it?
Yeah, so I spent a fair bit of time in Asia through 2019, back end of 2019. What was interesting to me was that actually the premise of Two Circles business and the sort of infusion of data and digital seemed to remind me a little bit of sort of 2016, 17, 18 in Europe. So it was general acknowledgement that this sort of space was going to be important, but not really a recognition of how important and the urgency to get one's house in order. So if I look at Europe around that time period, you also had things like Gdpr looming and a real sense of that data and digital rights holders were going to have to commit to do it properly. And we didn't at the time really recognize that kind of coherence in terms of an effort in Asia overall. That said, there was definitely a bit of a significant talent out of UK and Europe starting to go work over there. And so if I look at a great friend of Two Circles, guy called James Kennedy, who was CMO at Southampton, Hong Kong Jockey Club. And so Two Circles sort of started to do some work with James and some other work in the region. And that's often the way that it happens. It just takes a few evangelists to have some success and then start to change the world and way in which the world operates. No surprise, I would imagine that horse racing and sports more attuned to the betting market were some of the early adopters in the Asian market. So it will happen that the market professionalizes in sort of Two Circles direction. My sense would be 2021, 2022, depending how quickly they're able to exit some of the challenges we've got at the moment compared to UK and Europe.
It's interesting there, Matt, that you looked ahead to 2021, 2022, and can I ask you the question? How important is it for people who either work in the industry or who aspire to work in the industry to be able to look ahead and to forecast and to identify possible scenarios for what might happen?
So I think the fundamental philosophy that we've always had as Two Circles is that not to do that is unforgivable. It doesn't mean you can't get everything right, but if you made an equivalent to somebody on a football pitch, right? If you're playing right back in a football match, you're drilled in terms of, well, if the ball comes to me from there, then I know that I'm going to pass it there. If it comes to me from here, then I'm going to move back and pass to my centre back, or I'm going to push up. The on-pitch performance is always very drilled. So you're extremely aware that if this happens, then I know what I'm going to do next. And it's always astonished me when I came into working in sport and entertainment, that it was all sort of a little bit made up as it went along. And I think over time, with more people coming outside of the sports industry into sport, it has got better at planning. Hopefully, Two Circles made a bit of a contribution in terms of evangelizing about the need to do it. And frankly, at the moment, I think we have no option but to plan and think through different scenarios for our own organizations, because we've already seen that the times are changing quickly, and to not be clear what you're going to do if your cash flow halves, or if 2 clients come around the corner that you weren't expecting, or if you lose your top 3 employees to another organization, or if the inflation rate doubles, or if the interest rate changes. You can't run a sensible organization in any sector, let alone in sport, unless you're starting to think those scenarios through.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come back to what's happened this year. I just want to take a time out and move to one side, because we've got a question from Victoria. How do I ask this question, Victoria? I don't know whether to assume that that you've got a sport management master's, or that you're thinking about studying for a sport management master's. But Victoria asks about, what do you need to get that push in the sport industry to your career? And she begins by asking, I have a question. Do you think a sport management master's degree is worth it, in the sense that it will give you that extra push? Or do you think there are other ways to make it in a career, in a profession within the sport industry?
So both, I would answer. So I think, you and I were touching on this a little bit last week. I think the nature of sports education is finally changing significantly. I think there are hard skills which are fundamental to success, long-term success in a sports leadership environment now. If I put the clock back 10 years, I'd have said they might be relationships, sales track record, things in a fairly a-traditional market. But today, I think the ability to think in a structured way, the understanding of, think and structure your logic like a strategy consultant would, to understand how to manage the numbers and drive smart, pragmatic decisions out of those numbers, to have emotional intelligence to listen and coalesce and bring people with you, whether that's customers or whether that's your own team. Have the mental resilience to cope with the ups and downs, and the ability to focus. Some of those things are fundamental, and I don't believe you garner all of those simply by going into the industry age 18, 20, 21 and just kind of hoping you pick them up. So hard education, I think, is fundamental. That's not to say that I think all sports management, sports masters type qualifications engender those. I'm not sure that 6 months of lectures on the role of digital in sport, or the role of marketing disciplines in sport is that useful, because things are changing so quickly. So what I'd say is just try and make your experience as applied and as theoretical and as grounded in good business discipline as you can. It just so happens your experience is in sport, as opposed to looking for somewhere that's going to give you sort of 6 months worth of lectures on the importance of having good digital proposition in sport, because I just think it's changing too quickly. There are other ways too. I made the call in strategy consultancy not to do an MBA, because I thought I'd learned a lot in an applied base, being in strategy consultancy to start with. But I have to say, I still think the majority of employers in sport don't recognise education enough, don't educate the need for education enough. And so I would definitely advocate getting some experience, whether it's an MPhil, whether it's a master's, whatever it is, and then bring it into sport. But don't assume that that's going to put you at the head of the queue. It's going to make you better once you're in, and more effective for the long term once you're in. But it's not. I don't think it's going to jump any hurdles to going in higher up an organisation.
Mm. So now I'm going to engage in some gratuitous advertising, but also some balanced, a balanced response to Victoria. Victoria, I'm the program director of a master's in sport at a global top 50 business school. You know, what do you want me to say? But beyond that, what I would say is that you've got to have a sense of where you want to be in 5 or 10 years time. You know, and try to think of it in terms of what would your ideal job be, because to be able to secure that ideal job, ultimately you're going to have a skill set and a body of knowledge inside your head that enables you to get there. The interesting thing is we do now have an environment in which there are lots and lots of choices around sport management education. So, you know, be a discerning shopper and go and ask difficult questions of program directors. You know, what is your program going to do for me? Which organizations am I going to work for? Which skills will I be developing? And then on that basis, decide whether a sport management master's route is good for you, or maybe something more generic, or alternatively, is it better to actually go and get a job and then think about a master's later? So, you know, we could talk about this for a long time. I don't want to, because we've got another couple of questions that have come in. Matt, I will come to you in a second, but I'm going to go to my friend Brett. Welcome back, Brett, regular supporter of our webinar series. And Brett is asking, if I can just find it, about cultural context. So he says, having worked across a number of markets and sports, what approach, Matt, did you take to understanding the cultural context of your clients and establishing a rapport with them in specific markets?
So ultimately, we're building a people business, right? So because the business grew quite quickly, maybe 20-30% of the difficult conversations we had to have with clients quite quickly were Gareth and I, and 70% were the team. But the most fundamental thing in understanding and grasping the cultural context of the clients was getting our hiring right. And we could have hired 100 people from Unilever or Procter and Gamble or Wonderman or any other big kind of very data orientated business who probably could have grasped the fundamental dynamics of Two Circles proposition. But only 2 out of those 100 had the emotional intelligence, the listening skills, the intuitive understanding of change management and things that gave us the confidence that we could put them into meet the chief executive of a top tier rugby or football club within 6 months, and they could credibly explain to a chief exec exactly why half their marketing budget had been wasted for the last 3 years, and the way in which that could be resolved in a non-judgmental, clear and professional way. And so really it was as simple as making sure we've hired right brain and left brain people who had the understanding, ability to understand the data, read the problems, and then gently, with as much listening, probably more listening than talking, explain those into a client. Number one. And number two was about the way in which, once those individuals joined our organization, we were very, very clear with them on the challenge that our business was focused around, but also the support we were prepared to give those people. So we took probably 80% of our learning and development support for our team, the pastoral care, the values and behaviours set that we expected out of them. That was all taken from my running a leadership development business in Lane 4. So a lot of it was based on things I'd seen that worked well at Coke, things I'd seen that worked well at Procter and Gamble for the work that Lane 4 had done. So we hired people who could very clearly establish the political lie of the land and the need for change in clients, but also develop themselves into really credible, very rounded sports professionals through the support we were giving them.
Mm-hmm. Another one, which I think is actually a really interesting one. And just to say before I ask this question, I want to go back to talk about this pandemic period and looking into the future. But anonymous attendee is the so good day to you. Good day to you, anonymous attendee. Whoever you are, wherever you are, good day to you, anonymous attendee. He's asking, or she's asking, I'm interested to know about sponsorship pitching. What constitutes a great sponsorship pitch? And the question seems to be, what are the cornerstones you look at and say that person did it well and they learned well and executed it well?
Great question.
That wasn't your question, was it, Matt? You're asking yourself that question, or is this genuinely an anonymous attendee?
That is a great question, anonymous attendee. I think it's the same as pitching anything to anyone. It's about, you start from a point of how do I understand this customer? What are the things that are most important to them? What might they be looking to get out of a long-term relationship? And therefore, how do I think creatively about my proposition to address that? So I'm providing them with a solution. It's the same as you're exactly the same thinking process. If you're selling a season ticket, so you're selling a place of hospitality, an OTT proposition as a sponsorship. So from a sponsorship perspective, the biggest problem in the last 20 years has been pride slides. So the number of rights holders that I've seen present that have sort of said, look, here's, we're here for a conversation, but we'll just tell you a bit about us first. And then an hour and a half later, 20 slides later and 4 videos, kind of say, okay, so what are you going to do with our billboards? It's absolutely nonsensical, betrays no insight or understanding into the needs of the client. What I think good looks like, I think good started in the UK with the London 2012 pitching for local sponsors. They actually started by saying, look, what is going on in the FMCG market, the telcos market, the healthcare market, things at the moment? What do we therefore imagine? How do we therefore imagine RIP might be able to help? And they had a very clear idea of how they thought they'd be able to activate and support a specific industry before they walked into a door with a chief exec. And they'd thought through in detail the dynamics of every single potential partner they went to see, and it really showed their understanding. And no surprise that despite having no commercial inventory, because it was all on the BBC, and no advertising hoardings and no billboards, they did an extremely good job of finding commercial partners. Similar approach at the moment being taken by Tim Hunt and his team at Williams. Struggling a bit as an F1 team on the track, but actually if you look at some of the deals and things they're creating, they're interested in creating fluid business partnerships where they start with business modeling to understand the client in question. They show that deep understanding. Their first conversation is a lot more about, so tell us a bit about your dynamics, tell us about some of your business problems. The best question to ask up front is, how do you make money? And from that start point and those clues, they're able to think about how their effectively passion proposition maps to that. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's a long-winded answer to say a lot less about you and a lot more about them.
Great answer. I've got one from Sushmit, who is one of EMLYON's own, an MSc student on our sport program. He's asking, what does a company or, for example, a sports club expect from a sport management graduate?
I think if you follow the logic on from what I was explaining last time in terms of the sport management investment that you're making yourself is for the long term, as opposed to the initial hookup into a role. It will help with that, but really they're looking, when I'm interviewing somebody for a role, I'm looking for somebody who's a potential chief exec or board member in 10 years time. And so my answer to this question would be the same as, what am I looking for from somebody who spent 5 years at Accenture, as what am I looking for from somebody who spent 5 years in business, getting a management degree, or 5 years doing 3 degrees at university. It's the same answer, which is, I'm looking for you to have developed yourself, both your right and your left brain. So you might come from an engineering and science background, but I want to see that you you're interested in creativity, that you have a good sense of empathy, and you can articulate your ideas in a really clear way that's going to be compelling, not just to a client, but to your team when you're running a team of 200 people. Flip it the other way. If you come from like I did, from an arts background, I'm going to want to see nonetheless that you think in a deeply logical way about some challenges you see, so that you're interested in why those seats are empty, or you have a good intuitive sense of why season ticket attrition rate might be going up in the next 3 years and how you might pull that down, so that you can be very evidence and data led, even if you come from an arts background. So I'm looking for both, and that's kind of I guess the hygiene factor stuff that I'd be looking for in somebody coming out of an academic qualification. And what makes the real difference is actually my belief that within 6 months of coming from an academic background or a corporate background like an Accenture, you'll be safe, if you like, talking to the chief exec of a club or a team in a league, and they will feel that you can empathize and have the gravitas to go with them on their challenges. And that's about emotional intelligence. That's about your ability to read signs. So a lot of the time, if I'm interviewing somebody, I'll deliberately change my body language and see how they react. If I change my body language and they're just plowing on in their own furrow, I'll kind of get a sense, well, maybe actually you're not that good at picking those signs up. I'll be listening quite closely to the questions they ask me, because that's the way that you engage with senior people, is to ask as well as talk. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I guess I'm saying it's the same. It's no different criteria from somebody for sports management as there is from 5 years at Accenture, as there is from 3 degrees, which is, can you be on my board in 10 years' time? And that's a function of right brain, left brain, and the emotional intelligence to go with it.
Cool answers, Matt. Again, we could talk about those in even more detail than you have done already. But I do want to go back to the 1st of February. And then I want to go from today and looking forwards. From the 1st of February, and the reason obviously for framing it in this way is we know a pandemic just hit us.
Yeah.
But in a sporting context, what just happened?
So what's just happened over the last 6 months, or what was happening?
What has happened over that last 6, 7, 8 months?
I guess
how has the pandemic shaken things up? How has it changed things?
So my fundamental belief is that in any passion industry, if it's theatre, if it's I was reading an article at the weekend about auctions, if it's fashion, if it's restaurants, the pandemic hasn't fundamentally changed the nature of hasn't created any new pressures. It's just exacerbated the pressures that were already beginning to tell. Like I mentioned on sport, people were starting to challenge some revenue streams, challenge whether things were getting a bit frothy, but there was a lot of investment and they were trying to square all those circles. Sort of put them in a pressure cooker and said, look, over the course of the next 6 months, you're going to go through 10 years of change and then come out the end and have to cope with it. And so effectively what's happened to sport is that every single cost line and revenue stream has been through a stress test.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask you a little kind of digression?
Yep.
Aside from that? You talked about passion industries. What do you mean by that?
So industries where heavily brand, which have an experiential dimension, and where brand in the broadest sense has a real impact, and ultimately where there is a human experience as part of that. So I go to eat at a restaurant, I go to watch a gig, I take a flying jump and spend too much money on a piece of art, whatever it might be. There's something intangible in it that makes us prepared to go the extra mile for it. So for me, that's music and sport. For other people, that's art and theatre. It kind of depends what floats your boat. But all of those are undergoing fundamental change. And the last 6 months because it's taken that experience away, that visceral experience away. All of those have had to cope in the short term and look to now effectively looking to remodel their businesses for the long term.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question from Alex, which I'll come to in a moment, but can I bring us to today?
Yeah.
And I know that you've been writing about and commenting on the industry, the sport industry as we've known it and where it's going from here. But on this day today, what does sport face? You know, what kind of state is sport in? What's the position for us who have an interest in this industry?
So sat here today with the vagaries of the virus still over our heads. I think the reality is, for the next 18 months, we're in a process of probably the most difficult leadership challenge that anyone in sports had since McCormack tried to create a sports industry in the 1960s, on the basis that, and it was best described actually by a guy called Kevin Smeaton, who's global managing partner at McKinsey. He says that for chief execs and leaders today, simultaneously trying to look at your business through a microscope and look at a telescope in terms of where the world's going gives you a headache, because leaders are having to have, on one level, be more forensic, more understanding of the cash flow, more arm to arm with their teams, despite the fact they're on Zoom calls, more focused on regular ongoing dialogue with your customers and your fans, because you're not seeing the stadium once a week, having to be more forensic and more detailed than ever before. But also the world's not going back. And so they're also simultaneously having to think, well, in a good case, if the world of sport is broadly back to normal in 2022, in 18 months time, we have to remodel our business now for what 2022 is going to look like. And so the challenge for leaders is, and it's an almost impossibility, because we're kind of going, be focused on today, understand your cash, bring your team aligned to you, share with them more than ever. And at the same time, hunker down, get a long-term plan for 2022, because your business model for today is not going to be fit for purpose. And it's hugely complex, full of contradictions. And that's why I'm doing a lot of writing, and that's why I'm doing a lot of sort of proactive communication, trying to help, based on my experience, help other leaders in this space, because not everybody who's leading businesses in sport today has had the benefit of spending time with you in Lyon, or understand, and not how everyone understands the realities of cash flows and P&Ls and balance sheets and all that kind of stuff, because they might be a chief exec in sport today because they're a really great salesperson, because they were kind of, it was their business 15 years ago and they're kind of coping with it. So they might not have the skills to hunker down and do that telescope and microscope things simultaneously. And that's why sessions like this are really important.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you've talked there about how 2022 will look and business model change. So what's your view? You know, what does that business model change involve, and what is 2022 potentially going to look like?
So I think there are four things for 2022. I would say that the D word will be banned, so nobody will be allowed to use digital anymore. The world of digital and physical worlds will have completely fused. What does that mean in practice? Well, that's the reason that, you know, Amazon have shops. The reason that Swift, the kind of online cycling platform, are launching physical world events. You know, it's the reason why the music industry has recognized actually that vinyl has a purpose. So that digital and physical are completely fused in the way, because the next generations coming through don't see a distinction to them in the way that we do. So that's the first one. The second one, I think, is that, to your point, business models will need to be a lot more agile. So I know the team at Reach, Trinity Mirror in the UK, fairly well, who are having to completely reinvent their sports proposition in a world where actually there's a finite value to the printed newspaper today, and that even the digital space, they're having to say, look, just selling advertising on digital isn't enough. We need to think about how we use data and digital to reach people who aren't reaching our proposition finding it themselves. We need to go find them, recruit them, expose them to advertising and understand the cost of acquisition. Even though it's fiddly and difficult, we need to go to more people because they're not coming to us, and that agility around business model. So it's fusing digital and physical, real agility around your business model in exactly the same way that the music entertainment industry and concerts will change completely in the next 2 years. They'll start understanding that the minute that VR is mature, that and you can have Taylor Swift in your literally in your VR in 2 years' time, you'd be able to have Taylor Swift in your living room. That might be a better proposition digitally in the world post coronavirus for anybody than looking from the 952nd tier of a stadium to watch a concert from a long way away. So that was changing completely. The economic picture is changing completely. So we all need to understand how we're going to cope with a world where interest rates might continue to move upwards, but inflation might go slower, or inflation might go slower, but interest rates might rise. So understand that agility that we're going to need for our propositions in that regard. And fourthly, and deliberately not fourthly, because it's probably the most important thing, we're going to need to understand how our propositions look different in a world where purpose is front and center. Mm-hmm. So I probably don't, given the demographics of the people on the call, I probably don't need to explain that in as much detail, but that genie is thoroughly out of the box and out of the bottle in terms of what that means for all of us. And it was interesting seeing the fan reaction to a lot of the Premier League club moves to have more influence on the grassroots of the football pyramid in the UK over the last few weeks. It is going to be utterly unsustainable for any agency, any team, any league, any player not to have a firm position and purpose for the next generations of fans. So it's a real heady cocktail of things for leaders to get their head around, while simultaneously trying to work out how many people they need to furlough and whether they can pay the bank interest next month. And that's the biggest challenge at the moment is, we're trying to cope with the day-to-day through our microscope, and also trying to think about the heady cocktail of challenges through our telescope.
Interestingly, I'm also a big music fan.
Yeah,
and I regularly use Bandcamp, if you know Bandcamp. And what I found amazing about Bandcamp is the number of artists now who are selling cassettes via Bandcamp. So this fusion of
that's exactly it.
Virtual and real, and I thought cassettes were dead. They were long gone. But I've got a dusty box in my loft, I think, that I'm going to open up and bring out my cassettes again, because we're back to this.
That's exactly it. And I think some of the I talked to Swift for one of the interviews, and there's a real appreciation, as Amazon do, that the visceral nature of experience will never go away. It just needs to be framed in a way that works for the proposition. It's really interesting to me that if you look at, if I asked you, what's the defining communication mechanic of Donald Trump's presidency, you'd say Twitter, right? And yet, if you look at how he's managing these kind of last few weeks before the election, absolutely all mass physical rallies. And so even somebody who's really made rested their presidency on digital communication absolutely sees the value of heavy physical contact at the right time.
Matt, I have to say you hold an audience well. We're still running at the numbers that we had at the start, but I am aware that we're coming towards almost the end of an hour. So I don't want to detain either you or others particularly, but I do want to get Alex's question in, because I said I would. So Alex is asking, for some time there's been a trend of recruiting outside of the sport industry. Do you think this trend will continue? And if so, would you advise sports students to go and work in a different sector first?
Well, the advice I'd normally give in this regard would be, I don't think it matters if you've been to business school at Lyon, spent 2 years at Accenture, or started in sport, as long as the place where you've started in sport has given you the fundamental skills that you're going to need for the long term. bearing in mind that's not experience of selling sponsorship. That's not having built a website. That's not having done a load of creative activation with brands. The fundamental skills I come back to are have your first 3 to 5 years in a working environment or a business school environment taught you structured thinking, taught you to argue your logic, argue logically and concisely. Have they taught you the basics of financial and business management? Have they taught you how to understand how customers think, whether they're internal customers, employees, or external customers and clients? Have they given you a diversity of thought so you can, and an emotional intelligence that enables you to engage with a chief exec in 5 years as well as in 15 years? And have they given you just a solid sense of identity and who you are and can bring to bear an employee? And I think you would get those at Procter and Gamble. I think you would get those at Two Circles. I don't think you would get those at many rights holders, if I'm honest. I don't think you would get those at, I know you won't get those at most agencies. And so, but you may get some of them at an Accenture or a McKinsey or a Booz or a Bain. So I don't think it really matters where you start, but that would be my checklist for you of the things you need to develop if you're going to aspire to a long-term and happy career in the sports space.
And just to reiterate, not just what Matt has said, but something that I said earlier, it's not just a case of understanding where you've come from and what you've got right now. It's also trying to imagine where you're going in the future, because we work in a very different environment now in sport. If I go back to the early stages of when I first started to work in this area, and there were very few career opportunities. The industry is much more mature now than it once was, and there are lots of opportunities, lots of different types of role that you can enter into. And I think there is a generic skill set that will ultimately help you to be successful in any of those roles. But at the same time, I think there are certain roles that do require the fine tuning or otherwise particularly accentuate certain types of skills and competencies. And so for either Matt or myself to say, right, okay, this is what you need. I think we can say, okay, this is what you need. But I think there's also something about you as an individual and where you're going and what you think you do well, what your specific needs are. And so it's not just a case of looking outwards. I think you also need to look inwards as well. Sorry, Matt.
One thing I would say is the best advice I was ever given was from a coach that I was talking to, a business coach who I was talking to when thinking about where next at Lane 4. And she said to me, go for a run, do whatever you need to do just to get yourself brain quiet, and then lock yourself in a dark room and draw a picture that represents what your ideal working day would be in 10 years' time. And then everything you do, the career jumps you make, the extra learning you do, what you read, somehow you need to be able to join the dots together. And it's making the same point, but actually drawing it on a picture is quite a good discipline. Nicholas, I think can I just jump in? I saw Nicholas.
Yeah, of course.
How does sport get out of short-term focus? The answer is through a pandemic, right? If you're looking, because there's not a sports organization in the world that isn't desperately rethinking its finance structure at the moment and desperately having everything challenged that it believed to be true. And you cannot talk to a financier without a long-term view of your market, the opportunity, the risk, your team engagement, and how your margins are going to change with a macroeconomic picture that's changing markedly. And so I think you will find, and hopefully you will find, over the course of the next year to year and a half, the outlook of the sports industry will have changed significantly in that regard. And hopefully some of you graduating soon will be able to contribute to that.
So I think the fact that Nicholas, I'm assuming that's Nick Meacham, not Nicholas Meacham, Nick Meacham I think we may know him if it's the Nick Meacham I'm thinking about. I think, thanks for that question, Nick. And what we now know is the participants in today's session have actually been fairly diverse. not just in terms of they're all students, but they're people working in industry. And I don't think that looking at the participants too, they're not all in Britain or France or Europe. They're from across the world. And so hopefully the answers that you've given, Matt, have proved a source of insight and inspiration to people, and a reference. And as ever, I really enjoyed listening to you speak and some of the things that you've said, and they've done exactly what I thought. You've done exactly what I thought you would do, which is provide a view of the industry, and a view not just of the past, but a view of the future that will help people to go away from here today and think in a different way about the way in which they see sport and the way in which they see the development of the industry in the coming years. So I'm just to let people know, I'm going to summarize for 30 seconds. So if you've got one last question, you can ask your one last question whilst I summarize. Can I say thank you to Matt, and thank you for being here today and spending time with us. Can I also say thank you to the audience, and somebody commented in the chat, they said thank you for such great questions. I think the questions were great. We didn't rehearse this, we didn't practice, and yet the hour has flown by. We could probably spend another hour here. So thanks for everybody who's been involved, because I think the dynamic has been good. Otherwise, just to say thanks to 16, who's in Lyon. She pressed the button, she's done the recording. So thanks to 16 for that as well. The recording will be available in due course, and we'll let people know through social media channels that it's available. Just another reminder that we are doing these monthly. Next month, Director of Sustainability from Formula E. Otherwise, just to say again, Matt, thank you. Everybody stay safe.
Cool, pleasure, mate.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you.